The border didn't exist yet, but the bodies already did. By the time the First War officially started, 30,000 Arabs and Jews had already fled their homes, before the armies even showed up, before the United Nations voted, before anyone drew a single line on a map. They were running from neighbors who'd lived next door for generations. And here's the thing that'll sit wrong with you by the end of this. Most of them didn't know what they were running from. They just knew the man selling them bread last Tuesday had stopped making eye contact. The kids who used to play soccer in the same dirt lot now threw rocks when the sun went down. Something had shifted. Not overnight, slowly, like a foundation cracking under a house you've lived in your whole life. We're going to watch that crack split open. We're going to see how two populations who shared the same land for centuries, who traded, intermarried, borrowed each other's words, ended up in a war that never really ended. And before you settle into whatever story you think you already know, understand this. The version you learned in school, the one your uncle argues about at Thanksgiving, the Twitter thread that made you angry last month, they all skipped the same chapter. The part where nobody wanted this. The part where the people actually living there tried to stop it, failed, and then spent the next 75 years paying for that failure. There's a photograph coming later in this story. You'll know it when you see it. A single image that newspapers around the world refused to print for 6 years. When it finally came out, 3 governments fell within a month. We'll get there. But first, you need to understand how people who once shared wells ended up fighting over the ashes. The Jews didn't just show up out of nowhere, and the Arabs weren't some ancient, unchanging presence waiting in the desert. Both of those narratives are lies that make the story simpler and the killing easier to justify. The truth is uglier and stranger. The truth is that by the time the first bullet was fired in what history calls the First Arab-Israeli War, the groundwork had been laid not by rabbis or imams, not by warriors or kings, but by a handful of European diplomats who'd never set foot in Palestine and couldn't find Jerusalem on a map if you gave them 3 guesses. Their names don't matter, yet. We'll meet them when it's time. For now, just know they were sitting in wood-paneled rooms in London and Paris, drinking tea, moving pins on maps like it was a game of Risk. And the people actually living on that land, the ones who'd wake up a decade later with rifles in their hands, shooting at their former customers, their old classmates, the family whose daughter married their cousin back when everyone still went to each other's weddings. Those people had no idea what was being decided for them. By the end of this, you're going to know 3 things your history teacher never told you. First, who actually started it, and it's not who either side claims. Second, the deal that could have stopped everything, the one that almost worked, and the single sentence in a telegram that killed it. Third, what happened in the villages nobody talks about, the ones that don't show up on maps anymore, where the math gets so dark that even the victors stopped counting. You're going to want to pause this and argue in the comments. You're going to want to pull up Wikipedia and fact-check me. Do it. I'll wait, because every single thing you're about to hear is documented, sourced, and available in archives that both sides wish would burn down. The problem isn't that we don't know what happened. The problem is we've spent 75 years arguing about what it means instead of looking at what it was. So here's what it was. The year is 1881. Not in Palestine, in Russia. A wave of pogroms tears through Jewish communities across the Pale of Settlement. Government-sanctioned massacres dressed up as spontaneous riots. Shops burned. Families slaughtered in their homes. The Tsar's government doesn't stop it. In some towns, police hand out vodka to the mobs before pointing them toward Jewish neighborhoods. Historians will later count more than 200 separate attacks across 3 years. Thousands dead, tens of thousands homeless, and out of that blood comes a new idea. Not a religious idea, a national one. A Jewish journalist in Odessa named Leo Pinsker writes a pamphlet called Auto-Emancipation. The title tells you everything. He's not asking the Russians to protect them. He's not appealing to Christian charity or Enlightenment values. He's saying, we need our own ground, our own borders, our own guns. The Jews, he argues, will never be safe as guests in someone else's country. They need to become hosts. They need sovereignty. The pamphlet spreads, reading groups form. They call themselves Hovevei Zion, lovers of Zion. Zion means Jerusalem, means the land their grandparents prayed toward 3 times a day for 2,000 years. But here's what matters. For most of these readers, it's not a religious return. It's a nationalist escape plan. They're not going to Palestine to wait for the Messiah. They're going because Europe is trying to kill them and they need somewhere defensible. The first wave leaves in 1882. 15,000 Jews over the next 2 decades. They call it the first Aliyah, the first ascent. They buy land from absentee Ottoman landlords, drain swamps, plant orange groves, build settlements with Hebrew names. And the people already living there, the Arab farmers, the Bedouin shepherds, the merchants in Jaffa and Haifa, they notice. Of course they notice. But at first, it doesn't look like a threat. It looks like a trickle of strange Europeans who don't speak Arabic, who pay too much for bad land, who die of malaria at twice the rate of the locals. The Ottomans don't care. They're bleeding out from a dozen wars, losing territory every decade, scrambling to modernize an empire held together by bribery and prayer. A few thousand Jews buying swampland in a backwater province? That's not even in the top 100 problems on the Sultan's desk. So the purchases continue. Legal, documented, registered in Ottoman land offices with stamps and signatures. But the peasants working that land, the fellahin, they're not part of the transaction. See, the Ottoman land system is feudal. A landlord in Damascus or Beirut owns 10,000 acres he's never seen. He rents it to Arab farmers who've worked it for generations, whose grandfathers are buried under those olive trees. Then one day, a new owner shows up. European clothes, foreign accent. He has a deed signed by a man in a city 300 miles away. The fellahin have no deed, no document, just a handshake agreement from their grandfather's time and a grave they visit on holidays. The new owners offer them wages to stay and work the land as laborers. Some take it, some leave. And in the leaving, the first crack forms. Not a violent crack, not yet, just a quiet one, the kind that compounds. Theodor Herzl never set foot in Russia during the pogroms. He was in Paris, a journalist. Covering the Dreyfus Affair, the trial of a French Jewish officer falsely accused of treason, convicted on forged evidence, sent to a penal colony while mobs screamed "Death to the Jews" outside the courthouse. Herzl stands in the crowd, watches it happen, and realizes something that'll change the next century. Assimilation is a lie. You can speak perfect French, serve in the army, cut your beard, marry a Gentile, eat pork on Christmas, and they'll still come for you when they need someone to blame. So in 1896, Herzl writes a book, Der Judenstaat, the Jewish State. He lays out a plan, not a pamphlet, not a dream, a political program. Buy land, negotiate with empires, build institutions, create a charter, establish sovereignty. He pitches it to the Ottomans. We'll pay off your debts. He pitches it to the British. We'll be your buffer state in the Middle East. He pitches it to anyone with power and gets laughed out of most rooms. But the Jews read it, the ones fleeing pogroms in Russia, the ones watching Dreyfus coverage in France, the ones in Vienna coffee houses arguing about Marx and nationalism. They read it, and something clicks. Within a year, the first Zionist Congress meets in Basel, Switzerland. 200 delegates. They draft a program. The goal, in Herzl's words, to create for the Jewish people a home in Palestine secured by public law. Notice the phrasing, not a spiritual return, a legal one, secured by public law. Herzl is thinking like a European nationalist because that's what he is. He looks at the Germans, the Italians, the Poles, all carving out nation-states from empires and thinks, why not us? He's not asking for permission from God. He's asking for a seat at the table where borders get drawn. And in Palestine, the second wave arrives. The second Aliyah, starting in 1904. This wave is different. These aren't just refugees. These are ideologues, socialists, pioneers. They're reading Tolstoy and Marx, debating collectivism, building kibbutzim, communal farms where property is shared and everyone works the land. They're also buying guns, because between the first and second wave, something changed. The fellahin aren't just leaving anymore. They're pushing back. It starts small, a fence cut in the night. Crops burned, livestock stolen. Then it escalates. In 1909, a Jewish guard is killed at a settlement near the Sea of Galilee. The settlers form a defense organization. They call it Hashomer, the Watchman. It's a dozen men on horseback with rifles. They patrol the settlements, return fire, start keeping lists of which Arab villages are friendly and which aren't. The Ottomans barely govern out here. Palestine is a rural backwater in a crumbling empire. There's no police force worth the name, so when violence starts, it doesn't get mediated by law. It gets mediated by whoever has more guns and fewer scruples. Both sides start to learn the same lesson. You can't call for help. You can only call for revenge. But we're still not at war, not even close, because most Arabs and Jews in Palestine aren't fighting. They're trading, intermarrying in rare cases, learning bits of each other's languages. In cities like Haifa and Jaffa, Jewish shopkeepers sell to Arab customers and vice versa. Kids play in mixed streets. It's not utopia. There's prejudice, segregation, economic resentment, but it's coexistence, tense coexistence, but still. The explosion doesn't come from Palestine. It comes from Europe. 1914. The Great War starts. The Ottomans side with Germany. Britain needs to knock them out of the fight. So the British start making promises, lots of promises, to lots of people. Contradictory promises, promises they know they can't keep but make anyway because the war is eating a generation and they'll say anything to anyone who might help them win. First promise, to the Arabs. The British send an officer named T.E. Lawrence, you know him as Lawrence of Arabia, to work with Hussein bin Ali, the Sharif of Mecca. The deal, laid out in letters between Hussein and the British High Commissioner in Cairo, goes like this. You Arabs revolt against the Ottomans, tie up their troops, and when we win, we'll support an independent Arab kingdom stretching from Syria to Yemen. One unified Arab state, your state. Hussein believes them. Why wouldn't he? The letters are signed. The British are desperate. His sons lead the revolt. Arab fighters blow up Ottoman trains, cut supply lines, tie down 35,000 Ottoman troops who could have been fighting the British in Egypt. They do their part. Second promise, to the French. In secret, a British diplomat named Sykes and a French diplomat named Picot draw up an agreement. They literally draw lines on a map with a grease pencil, dividing the Ottoman Empire between British and French zones of influence. The Sykes-Picot Agreement. France gets Syria and Lebanon. Britain gets Iraq and a chunk of Palestine. They sign it in May 1916. The same month, Hussein is launching the Arab Revolt based on the promise of one unified Arab state. Nobody tells Hussein about Sykes-Picot. Third promise, to the Jews. In 1917, the British Foreign Secretary, Arthur Balfour, writes a letter to Lord Rothschild, a prominent British Zionist. It's one paragraph long, 67 words, and it says, His Majesty's government views with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people and will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object, it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine. That's the Balfour Declaration, 67 words that'll birth a century of war. Notice what it doesn't say. It doesn't say, quote, 1. It says, quote, 2. It doesn't define borders. It doesn't explain how you build a national home for one people without prejudicing the rights of another people who already live there. It's vague enough to mean anything and specific enough to mean something. The Zionists read it as a green light. The Arabs read it as a betrayal. The British read it as a useful piece of wartime propaganda that costs them nothing right now and might help later. The war ends. The Ottomans collapse. The British march into Palestine in December 1917. General Allenby walks into Jerusalem on foot, doesn't ride a horse, doesn't want to look like a conqueror. He's lying. He is a conqueror. Palestine is now a British colony in everything but name. They call it a, quote, 3 because that sounds nicer. A mandate from the League of Nations to administer the territory until it's ready for self-determination. The Arabs expect independence. They were promised it. Hussein's son Faisal sets up a government in Damascus, declares himself king of Syria. The French kick him out within a year. Sykes-Picot wasn't a secret anymore. France takes Syria and Lebanon. Britain takes Palestine and Iraq. The dream of one unified Arab state dies in a conference room in Paris, while diplomats who can't pronounce the names of the cities they're carving up argue over train schedules and oil pipelines. And the Jews? They start arriving in larger numbers. The third Aliyah, starting in 1919, 35,000 in 5 years. These are Bolshevik refugees fleeing the Russian Civil War, Polish Jews escaping pogroms in the new Polish state, idealists coming to build the socialist utopia that failed in Europe. They're younger, harder, more militant than the earlier waves. They've seen violence up close. They're not shocked by it anymore. The British are stuck. They've promised the Arabs self-determination. They've promised the Jews a national home. These promises are incompatible. The British know it, so they try to manage it, balance it. They restrict Jewish land purchases in some areas. They limit immigration numbers. They play both sides against the middle and hope something workable emerges. It doesn't. In 1920, riots break out in Jerusalem during the Jewish festival of Passover. Arab mobs attack Jewish neighborhoods. 5 Jews killed, 200 wounded. The British arrest the rioters, Arabs and Jews both, but the message is clear. This isn't about religion. It's about land and who gets to govern it. In 1921, worse riots in Jaffa. An argument at a May Day parade turns into a pogrom. Arab crowds attack Jewish immigrants. 47 Jews dead, 140 wounded. The British send in troops, impose curfews, and launch a commission to investigate. The commission's conclusion? Arab anger is driven by fear of being overwhelmed by Jewish immigration and displaced from their land. Recommendation: slow down immigration. The Zionists are furious. The Balfour Declaration promised them a national home, and now the British are capping immigration? But the British are doing math. There are 600,000 Arabs in Palestine, 75,000 Jews. If immigration continues at the current rate, the demographics flip in a generation. And the Arabs aren't going to accept minority status in a land where they've been the majority for 1,000 years. So the British cut a deal. The Jewish Agency, the quasi-governmental body representing Zionist interests, gets to approve which Jews immigrate, manage land purchases, run schools and hospitals. It's a state within a state. The Arabs get promises, committees, consultations, no actual power, because the British don't trust them not to shut down Jewish immigration entirely, which would violate the Balfour Declaration and make Britain look bad in front of the League of Nations. The Arabs start to organize, not as Ottomans anymore. The empire is dead. Not as Syrians. The French crushed that. As Palestinians. That identity, Palestinian, gets weaponized now. It means we are the people who live here, who've always lived here, and we're not leaving. The Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, Hajj Amin al-Husseini, becomes the face of Arab resistance. He's young, ambitious, and very good at turning religious arguments into nationalist ones. 1929, another flashpoint, this time at the Western Wall in Jerusalem, the last standing wall of the ancient Jewish temple, the holiest site in Judaism. It's also the base of the Temple Mount, which holds the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock, the third holiest sites in Islam. Jews pray at the wall. Muslims pray above it. For centuries, this worked. Tense, but workable. Then in August, a group of young religious Jews marches to the wall, raises the Zionist flag, sings the Zionist anthem. It's a nationalist demonstration at a religious site. The Arabs see it as a claim on the Temple Mount. A week later, riots explode across Palestine. Hebron gets hit worst. Hebron, an ancient city with a small Jewish community that's lived there for centuries, completely separate from the Zionist movement. Arab mobs kill 67 Jews over 2 days. Rape, mutilate, burn homes. The British do nothing for the first 24 hours. The Jewish community is radicalized overnight. If Hebron, where Jews and Arabs had coexisted peacefully, where Jews weren't even Zionists, could turn into a massacre, then nowhere is safe. The old strategy of relying on British protection is dead. The Haganah forms, a Jewish paramilitary force, bigger than Hashomer, better armed, trained. They start stockpiling weapons, running drills, preparing for the next time, because everyone knows there will be a next time. The 1930s are the decade where it all accelerates. Hitler takes power in Germany. Jews start fleeing Europe not in thousands but in tens of thousands. The British try to cap immigration. The Zionists start running illegal ships. The British intercept some, turn them back, send Jews back to Europe. Some of those ships will end up in Nazi camps. The moral calculus gets impossible. The Arabs watch the numbers climb. In 1931, there are 175,000 Jews in Palestine. By 1936, there are 400,000. The Arab population grows too. Better healthcare, less infant mortality, but not at that rate. The math is screaming at them. If this continues, we lose. So in 1936, they revolt. Not riots this time, a revolt. Organized, sustained. It starts with a general strike. Arab workers refuse to work. Shops close. Ports shut down. They demand an end to Jewish immigration, a ban on land sales to Jews, and self-governance. The British ignore them. The strike spreads, turns violent. Arab fighters ambush British patrols, blow up rail lines, attack Jewish settlements. The British send in 20,000 troops, declare martial law, start mass arrests, demolish homes of suspected militants. The revolt lasts 3 years. By the time it's crushed in 1939, 5,000 Arabs are dead, 15,000 wounded, 5,000 imprisoned. The Jewish casualties are lighter, but still real. 400 dead, dozens of settlements attacked. And in the crushing, the British make a choice. They train Jewish auxiliary forces to fight alongside them against the Arab rebels, give them weapons, tactics, experience. The Haganah gets bigger, more professional. A splinter group, the Irgun, decides the Haganah isn't aggressive enough. They start bombing Arab markets, bus stations, cafes, killing civilians to create terror. The British call it terrorism. The Irgun calls it reprisal. The spiral tightens. The British, exhausted, issue a white paper in 1939. New policy. Jewish immigration capped at 15,000 per year for 5 years, then stopped entirely unless the Arabs consent. Land sales to Jews restricted. And within 10 years, Palestine becomes an independent state with an Arab majority and constitutional protections for the Jewish minority. The Zionists call it a betrayal. The Balfour Declaration is dead, they say. The British have sided with the Arabs, but the Arabs reject it too. Why should we accept 15,000 more Jews? Why should we wait 10 years for independence? Why should there be constitutional protections for a colonial population that shouldn't be here in the first place? Nobody's happy, which means the British policy is either perfectly balanced or perfectly stupid. History will suggest the latter. Then the Second World War starts. Everything freezes. The Zionists stop fighting the British because the Nazis are a bigger threat. The Arabs stay quiet because the British are cracking down. Palestine becomes a backwater in a global war. Quiet, for a few years. But in Europe, the Holocaust is happening. 6 million Jews dead by the time it's over. The survivors, the ones who walk out of Bergen-Belsen and Auschwitz and Treblinka, they have nowhere to go. Poland doesn't want them back. The locals killed more Jews after the war ended. Germany is rubble. France is collaborationist guilt. Britain still has the white paper in effect, which means Palestine is closed. So the Zionists start running ships again. Illegal immigration. The British intercept them, send the refugees to detention camps in Cyprus. Some ships get through. The ones that do are treated as a propaganda victory. Look, the British are turning away Holocaust survivors. The moral high ground shifts. In 1945, the war ends. Britain is broke. The empire is dying. India is about to go independent. The colonial project is over everywhere except the Middle East, and even there, it's on life support. The British don't want to be in Palestine anymore. It's costing too much money, too many soldiers, too much political capital. So they punt. In 1947, they hand the problem to the United Nations. Here, you figure it out. We're done. The UN forms a special committee, UNSCOP, They tour Palestine, interview Jews and Arabs, British officials, religious leaders. They see the tensions up close, and they come back with a plan. Partition, 2 states, 1 Jewish, 1 Arab. Jerusalem becomes an international city under UN control. The borders are drawn to give each population a state where they're the majority. The Jewish state gets 55% of the land, mostly the Negev desert and the coastal plain. The Arab state gets 45%, the West Bank, Gaza, the Galilee Highlands. The map looks insane. Borders zigzag, cut villages in half, create isolated enclaves. It's not a plan anyone loves, but it's a plan that might work if both sides accept it. The vote happens in November 1947, the General Assembly. 33 in favor, 13 against, 10 abstentions. The resolution passes. The Jews celebrate in the streets. The Zionist dream, the thing Herzl wrote about 50 years ago, is now international law. They have a state. It's smaller than they wanted. The borders are terrible, but it's real, legal, recognized. The Arabs reject it outright. Every Arab state votes no. The Palestinian leadership votes no. And they have a point, one that'll echo for the next 75 years. Why should we accept a partition plan that gives away our land to people who mostly arrived in the last 30 years? The UN doesn't have the right to partition a country without the consent of the people living there. Imagine if the UN voted to partition your state and give half of it to a population that immigrated recently. Would you accept it? Would you call the people resisting it terrorists or freedom fighters? That question doesn't get answered, because within 24 hours of the UN vote, the shooting starts. It's not armies yet, it's militias. The Arab Higher Committee calls for a general strike. Arab fighters attack Jewish buses, convoys, settlements. The Haganah retaliates, hits Arab villages, clears roads. The British, who are supposed to maintain order until the mandate ends in May 1948, mostly stay in their barracks. They've announced they're leaving. They don't want to die for a partition plan they didn't create and don't support. The violence escalates. In December, the Irgun bombs the Arab-owned Semiramis Hotel in Jerusalem, kills 26 people, including the Spanish consul. In January, Arab fighters destroy a Jewish convoy near Jerusalem, 35 Haganah soldiers dead. The bodies are mutilated. Photos circulate. Both sides use them as recruitment. This is the Civil War phase, November 1947 to May 1948. Before the official armies get involved. Just Jews and Arabs in Palestine, killing each other over a plan that one side celebrated and the other side rejected. The Arab forces in this phase are irregular. Militia groups from Palestinian villages, volunteer fighters from Syria and Iraq, a small force led by Fawzi al-Kawukji, a Syrian officer who fought in the 1936 revolt. They have rifles, experience, local knowledge. What they don't have is coordination. Each group operates independently, answers to different leaders, pursues different goals. Some want to stop partition, some want to kill Jews, some just want to loot. The Jewish forces are more organized. The Haganah has 45,000 members by early 1948. They've been training for this since the 1920s. They have supply lines, command structures, foreign support, weapons smuggled in from Czechoslovakia, donations from American Jews, volunteers from Europe. The Irgun and another group, Lehi, operate as independent terror cells. They don't coordinate with the Haganah, they just kill. By March, the Arab militias are losing. They control some roads, some villages, but they can't take the major cities. Jewish forces are better armed, better trained, better led. The Palestinian leadership is in disarray. The Grand Mufti is in exile. The local committees can't agree on strategy, and the surrounding Arab states keep promising support that never arrives. Then, in April, 2 events collapse whatever restraint still existed. First, Deir Yassin, a Palestinian village outside Jerusalem, April 9th. Irgun and Lehi forces attack at dawn. They're supposed to clear the village because it sits on a strategic road. What happens instead is a massacre. The fighters go house to house, shoot families, throw grenades into basements where civilians are hiding. Estimates of the dead range from 100 to 250. The exact number is still debated. What's not debated, it was a massacre, and it was deliberate. The news spreads. Arab radio broadcasts describe atrocities, some real, some exaggerated. The psychological effect is immediate. Arab villagers across Palestine panic. If Deir Yassin can happen, it can happen anywhere. Families pack whatever they can carry and run. Tens of thousands in the first week. The exile has started. Second, the Arab siege of Jerusalem is broken. Jewish forces clear the road to the city, push out the Arab militias. It's a military victory that secures West Jerusalem as a Jewish zone. But in the clearing, more villages are emptied. Some evacuate voluntarily. Some are expelled. Some are destroyed. Buildings demolished, wells poisoned to make sure no one comes back. By the end of April, 250,000 Palestinians have fled or been expelled. The refugee crisis that'll define the next century is already in motion, and the official war hasn't even started yet. May 14, 1948. The British Mandate expires. At 4 p.m., David Ben-Gurion stands in a small museum in Tel Aviv and reads the Declaration of Independence. The State of Israel exists. 11 minutes later, the United States recognizes it. The Soviet Union follows 3 days later. The two superpowers agree on almost nothing, but they both back this. That night, Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Iraq, and Lebanon invade. Not to help the Palestinians, they barely coordinate with the Palestinian militias. They invade to stop partition, to prevent a Jewish state, and in some cases, to grab land for themselves. Jordan's King Abdullah has a secret understanding with the Zionists. You take the Jewish areas, I take the West Bank. We avoid fighting each other if possible. The Arab League doesn't know. The Palestinians definitely don't know. The Arab armies total around 25,000 troops. Sounds like a lot. It's not. The Haganah, now reorganized as the Israel Defense Forces, fields 30,000, and that number climbs to 100,000 by the war's end. The IDF has better weapons. Those Czech arms shipments are pouring in now. They have interior lines, shorter supply routes, unified command. The Arab armies are moving into hostile territory, dealing with terrible logistics, and commanded by officers who spend as much time undermining each other as fighting the enemy. The first month, the Arabs make gains. Egyptian forces advance up the coast, reach within 20 miles of Tel Aviv. Syrian forces take territory in the north. The Jordanian Arab Legion, the best-trained Arab force, captures East Jerusalem and the Old City. Jewish forces are pushed back, take casualties, lose ground. Then the UN brokers a ceasefire. June 11th, 4 weeks of quiet. Both sides use it to rearm. The Israelis use it better. Massive arms shipments arrive. American Jews send money, volunteers. Jewish World War II veterans from the US, Britain, South Africa fly in to join the fight. The IDF reorganizes, trains, prepares for the next round. When the fighting resumes in July, it's not a contest anymore. The Israelis go on the offensive, push the Egyptians back, take more territory in the Galilee, secure the roads to Jerusalem. The Arab armies, undersupplied and poorly coordinated, start to fracture. By October, it's a rout. In the south, Israeli forces drive into the Negev, encircle Egyptian troops, force a retreat. In the north, they clear the Galilee, push Syrian forces back across the border. The Jordanians hold East Jerusalem and the West Bank. That's the deal they had with Ben-Gurion, and mostly, both sides stick to it. By January 1949, it's over. Armistice agreements are signed throughout the year. Israel has won, not just survived, won. The state that the Arab League said would be strangled in its crib now controls 78% of Mandate Palestine, more territory than the partition plan gave them. The Arab state envisioned by the UN never forms. Jordan annexes the West Bank. Egypt occupies Gaza. The Palestinians get nothing. And the refugees. 700,000 Palestinians have fled or been expelled. Some left in the early panic after Deir Yassin. Some were pushed out by advancing Israeli forces. Some left expecting to return when the Arab armies won. The Arab armies didn't win. Israel passes a law. Absentee property. If you fled, your land and home are now state property. You're not coming back. The refugees end up in camps. In Gaza, the West Bank, Jordan, Lebanon, Syria. The UN sets up an agency to care for them. UNRWA. Temporary, they say, until a solution is found. 75 years later, the camps are still there. The temporary is permanent. The Israelis call it the War of Independence. The Palestinians call it the Nakba, the catastrophe. Both names are true. One people got a state, another lost their homeland. Both will spend the next 3/4 of a century trying to reconcile those facts and failing. Israeli casualties, 6,000 dead, 1% of the entire Jewish population. In American terms, that's like losing 3 million people in a single year. Every family lost someone. The war becomes the founding myth, the story of survival against impossible odds. David versus Goliath, the Holocaust survivors who built a nation with their bare hands while the world tried to kill them. Arab casualties, harder to count. Estimates range from 10 to 15,000 dead, military and civilian combined. But the real loss isn't measured in bodies. It's measured in displacement, in villages that no longer exist, in keys that refugees still hold to houses that were demolished 70 years ago, in the children born in camps who are now grandparents, still waiting for the right of return that will never come. The photograph I mentioned at the start, it was taken in 1948 by a UN observer in a village south of Haifa. It shows a mass grave, Arab civilians. The number in the grave is disputed. Some say 60, some say 120. The UN observer who took it tried to publish it immediately, was told no. The photo stayed classified until 1954. When it came out, the Israeli government said the deaths were a tragic mistake during combat. The Arab governments said it was a planned massacre. 3 governments fell, but not because of the photo. They fell because their people realized the Arab armies had lost so badly that even their own propaganda couldn't hide it anymore. You can find the photo online if you search hard enough. I'm not going to describe it in more detail. You'll know it if you see it. Here's what the history books won't tell you straight. Both sides committed atrocities. The scale was different. The Israelis had more power, more organization, more capacity to destroy villages and expel populations. But the intent, the willingness to kill civilians to achieve political goals, that existed on both sides. Deir Yassin is documented. So is the Kfar Etzion massacre, where Arab forces killed 127 Jewish defenders after they surrendered. So are the attacks on Jewish convoys, the bus bombings, the market shootings. The difference is what happened after. Israel won, so it got to write the initial draft of history. The Nakba was barely mentioned in Israeli textbooks until the 1980s. The new historians, Israeli scholars who dug through the archives, proved that the refugee crisis wasn't just spontaneous flight. It was policy. Villages were systematically cleared. Plan Dalit, the IDF operation in April 1948, explicitly called for the destruction and expulsion of Arab villages in certain areas. Not all villages, not a genocide, but a planned, deliberate reduction of the Arab population in areas designated for Jewish control. The Arabs lost, so their narrative became the story of victimhood and resistance. The refugees became a permanent political symbol. Every Arab state kept them in camps, refused to integrate them, because they were more useful as a grievance than as citizens. The Arab League created a war that the Palestinians didn't start and then abandoned them when it was lost. And the people on the ground, the ones who just wanted to sell bread or grow olives or send their kids to school, they got crushed between 2 nationalisms, neither of which had space for coexistence. There was a deal that could have stopped it. Early in 1948, before the British left, before the invasion, a 2-state agreement negotiated in secret between moderate Zionist leaders and Palestinian notables, shared sovereignty in Jerusalem, limits on immigration tied to economic absorption, compensation for displaced Arabs. It was on paper, ready to sign. A telegram killed it, sent from the Grand Mufti in Cairo to his followers in Palestine. Anyone who signs a deal with the Zionists is a traitor and will be killed. 3 of the Palestinian negotiators were assassinated within a month. The deal died. On the Israeli side, the hardliners in the Irgun were preparing to torpedo any compromise too. They didn't want partition. They wanted the whole land. Begin, the Irgun leader, would have started a civil war if Ben-Gurion had ceded Jerusalem or accepted permanent borders. So the moderates on both sides were killed, sidelined, or silenced, and the maximalists took over. The people who believed that total victory was possible, that the other side could be driven out or dominated. They were wrong. But by the time everyone realized they were wrong, 700,000 people were already in refugee camps and 6,000 were dead. The First Arab-Israeli War didn't answer the question of who should control Palestine. It just turned the question into a permanent conflict. Israel existed now, recognized by the international community, militarily dominant, but it didn't have peace. It had armistice lines and a hostile population within its borders and enemy states on every border. The Palestinians existed too, but not as a state, as a diaspora, as a cause, as a people defined by loss and waiting, and the fighting didn't stop. The 1948 war was just the first. There'd be another in 56, another in 67, another in 73. Intifadas, operations, raids, ceasefires that were just pauses between rounds. Because the thing that made the war inevitable, two peoples claiming the same land, both with legitimate historical ties, both willing to fight for it, and neither willing to accept minority status, that thing never got resolved. It got frozen, and we're still living in that freeze. Tell me in the comments which side you think started it. Then tell me if, knowing what you know now, you still think that question has a clean answer. Because the click-to-war moment wasn't when Ben-Gurion declared independence. It wasn't when the Arab armies invaded. It wasn't even Deir Yassin or the Kfar Etzion massacre. It was 1881 in Russia, when the Tsar's police handed out vodka before a pogrom. It was 1917 in London, when Balfour signed a letter promising two things to two peoples that couldn't both be true. It was 1929 in Hebron, when a massacre proved that coexistence was a hope, not a plan. It was every moment when the people with power chose borders over people and nationalism over neighbors. The first war started long before the first shot, and it never really ended. It just paused, and we call the pauses peace.